Hey guys, I'm Code Knight, back once again with another video. Today, we're starting a new series called Deck Profiles. And it's pretty self-explanatory. I'll be doing deck profiles of my Yu-Gi-Oh! Unleashed characters' decks. And today, we're going to be starting off this first episode with David Tock's Clockwork deck. The Clockwork archetype is a fusion deck that focuses around draw power. Through said draw power, the user is capable of making sure that their hand is plentiful of fusion materials, so they can rapidly swarm the field with fusion monsters. So for this deck profile, I'll be showing you all of the cards that I would give David if I were ever to make a deck based around his archetype. And since these are fan-made cards, I'd recommend using Dueling Book in order to make them a reality, unless you're a really clever person and are capable of making them in real life. Also, to expand the deck, I'm also going to be including some new cards that I recently made, and even a couple of cards which were taken out of Yu-Gi-Oh! Unleashed, just to, fill the deck and stuff. Regardless, this is the deck profile of David Tock. Oh, and I'll be showing you all of the cards' effects, so you don't have to worry about that. So, let's begin. To start off, we've got 3 Clockwork Turtles. This was one of David's favorite cards. It's a pretty useful one. If it's used as a fusion material, you get to draw a card, and it has a Battle Fader effect for the graveyard. And it's a machine dupe target, so yeah. We've got 3 Clockwork Gadgets. This one's pretty self-explanatory. It's the Searcher for the archetype. 2 Clockwork Wyverns. You need this monster in order to go into Clockwork Dragon. It's got a decent special summoning effect, and it can search out fusion spells that enlist machine monsters. So things like Power Bond, Overload Fusion, which we'll get to. We've got 2 Clockwork Butterflies. This guy gives your fusion monsters 1,000 attack points if used as a fusion material. And he's even an Elemental Hero Prisma. So that's pretty cool. We've got 1 Clockwork Rocket. This guy's got a decent effect where you can summon him from your hand if one of your monsters is destroyed, and he can attack your opponent directly. We got 2 Clockwork Knights. These guys let you draw a card, and if you draw a Clockwork monster, you get to fusion summon, so that's decent, I suppose. Next up, we've got 2 new monsters. First off, Clockwork Golem. This guy can be special summoned from your hand, and he lets you summon even more Clockwork monsters to the field. Then there's Clockwork Beetle, another new monster, which has another special summon effect, and he even lets you replace some of your monsters for draw power, and even has a nice little bonus effect depending on what you draw. So that's basically all the monsters, so let's get into the spell and trap lineup, shall we? 3 Clockwork Polymer. This is the fusion spell for the archetype, and not only does it let you fusion summon, but it lets you special summon more Clockworks from your deck. We've got Clocksmith. I would only recommend running 1 of them. It's a pretty basic card. Every time you fusion summon, you draw a card. Pretty simple. We've got 2 Clock Tuning. Now this is an interesting spell card. It lets you send a Clockwork monster from your hand or deck to the graveyard in order to draw 2 cards. It's a basic, it's a basic draw card. Now this one's an interesting one. This was a deleted card from the series called Chime of the Old Clock. And what it does is let you reveal a Clockwork Fusion monster in your extra deck, and then special summon a Clockwork monster from your deck, so long as its name is listed as a fusion material for that monster. And there are a couple of fusion monsters in the archetype that require that. Another new spell card that we've got is Clockwork Fast Forward, and it's pretty self-explanatory. It lets you special summon a Clockwork monster from your deck. It's pretty useful. I'd recommend only running about 2 of them. Those are all the Clockwork spell cards, but we're not done yet. We've still got a few normal spell cards that actually exist that I put in this deck. We've got 2 Polymerization, because it's a fusion deck. We've got 2 Power Bond, because that's pretty much David's favorite spell card. 1 Overload Fusion. You really only need 1 because, well, there's only 1 monster in this entire archetype that benefits from it, but David did use it. We got 1 Machine Duplication. This is for Clockwork Turtle. And lastly, we've got this card, Fusion Recycling Plant. Well, this isn't something that David really used, but it is a fusion deck, so Fusion Recycling Plant would definitely help. Not to mention this deck does kind of need recycling now that I think about it, since it doesn't really have that much of it. So that's basically the spell cards. Lastly, we've got the traps. Clockwork Collection, 2 of these. This is David's favorite spell card. It lets him draw 2 cards by tributing one of his monsters. However, it lets you draw 3 if you tribute a fusion. We've got Clockwork Scramble, only 1 though. It reduces any effect damage you take, and you can remove it from your graveyard as a sort of fight or flight situation to add any spell to your hand. Although it is a pretty risky move. Clockwork Leap Back. It's essentially an Infernity Barrier for the archetype. Pretty effective if you manage to use it in conjunction with one of the fusion monsters. We've got Clockwork Rebirth. Now, this one lets you recycle Clockwork monsters. It's one of the archetype's few methods of recycling. It's a pretty useful card. I would recommend at least running 1 or 2. And lastly, we have a new card called Clockwork Decay. Now this one, I would only recommend running 1. And that's what I'm doing, I'm running 1. And that's basically the main deck. So, all we have left is the extra deck and its fusion monsters. The first fusion monster is 2 copies of Clockwork Cannon. This guy's pretty basic. He does burst damage and he gains power depending on the number of clockworks in your graveyard. Clockwork Fortress. I definitely run 2 of these. This guy is, not only is this guy pretty beefy, but he also has a nice negation effect where he can switch his battle position to negate a card effect. We got Clockwork Catapult. This guy, it can attack directly and it can do double attacks depending on your fusion materials. We got Clockwork Prince. This guy can be pretty useful since he allows you to banish a fusion spell from your deck to activate its effects straight away. So he's pretty useful for getting fusion spells that you might want to use. Like, say, banishing a copy of Power Bond to use its effects straight away. His upgraded form, Clockwork King. Pretty useful removal effect by recycling some of your monsters to remove some of your opponent's monsters. We got Clockwork Loco, who can equip the opponent's monsters to him, boost his own power and stuff. We've got a new monster, Clockwork Zeppelin. This new guy gains power depending on his fusion materials, and he's got a pretty interesting effect down here. And then we've got the ace monster, Clockwork Dragon. Since he's David's ace, I'm running 3 of him, because why not? He lets you activate trap cards from your hand at the cost of life points, and he has a pretty useful halving damage effect to reduce the damage you take from things like Power Bond. So, yeah. And lastly, we have Clockwork Paradox Dragon, its upgraded form. It's a dark monster, so you can summon it with Overload Fusion. But the most broken thing, in my opinion, is that it can equip any fusion monster from either player's graveyard. Any. And gain their effects. So yeah, that's a pretty nasty thing that you can probably have fun with, depending on graveyard stuff. But it also gets back some of your fusion monsters and equips them. And that's my deck profile for David Tock's Clockwork deck. Would you like to make any changes to it? And are there any other characters you'd like me to do deck profiles of? Drop a comment down below, make sure to like, subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time. Oh, and one more thing, I'd like to make a shout out to Shadow Duelist 0230. This YouTuber does his own Yu-Gi-Oh series with his pals called Yu-Gi-Oh Virtual On. I'd recommend checking him out. And I'd also like to thank him for doing a very special episode of his other Yu-Gi-Oh series where he essentially pits 2 fan-made Yu-Gi-Oh characters against each other in a duel. He recently did one of my characters, so I'd like to thank you for doing that, Shadow Duelist, and I'm looking forward to your latest episodes of your series. So, yeah. So yeah, that's all, and I'm Code Knight, and I'll see you guys next time.